Have you ever had a fever dream before? You wake up all confused. What in the world is going on? If you have no clue what I'm talking about, stay with me. I will explain shortly. But I'm sure many of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and that is what the Auburn basketball season has felt like this year. But it's over. Auburn basketball won the NIT championship, finished the season 22 and 16. Wow, what a final month of the season, I guess it was. We thought this season was potentially over after the SEC tournament loss to Tennessee, but Auburn chose to play in the NIT, and now the season ends with a championship. We're going to get into all of it on today's episode of Talking Tumors. I am Carson Horn. We have a lot to dive into. We've got to talk about this tournament for Auburn. We have to talk about this year for Auburn and then what the future holds. So, if you love Auburn basketball, this is the episode for you. This is the show for you. We are going to spend plenty of time, the entire episode today, on Auburn basketball. If you're looking for Auburn football content, I have that too. Don't worry. That's up on the YouTube channel at Talking Tumors on YouTube. Wherever you're watching this video is likely you can find it on the channel page. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. And if you haven't, subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate that as well. But with that being said, let's get into it. Let's talk about how this season ended to begin. So Auburn lost in the SEC tournament to Tennessee, and we had a show about that loss. We had a show about Auburn missing the NCAA tournament on Selection Sunday, but we really haven't talked too much more about Auburn basketball since that moment happened, since that occurred. But Auburn decided to play in the NIT against the wishes of some fans. And look, call a spade here on this show. I wasn't necessarily excited about Auburn playing in the NIT. Now, with that being said, I felt as if Auburn wanted to play in the NIT, they should play in the NIT. And so I supported their decision. I was just speaking from someone who watched every single game this season of Auburn basketball. I was not necessarily excited to watch more games if it was going to be the same level of play that we had seen from Auburn for a lot of this season. But the team decided they wanted to play in it, everyone except Keyshawn Murphy. And from the second half of the South Alabama game on, Auburn played with a lot of energy. They played together. They played with like they were having fun again, and that was really, really good to see. Now, again, I understand the caveat. I know the competition was not near as good in that tournament as it is in the SEC or as it is in major college basketball. You don't have to tell me that. I understand the caveat. But nonetheless, it was good to see from Auburn. It was good to see Auburn roll off 5 straight wins to win this tournament, to face some adversity and get over that hump, especially in the Tulsa game. So this was a really positive experience. And so I commend this Auburn basketball program. I commend Stephen Pearl and the players for deciding to play in this and deciding, hey, look, this is not where we want to be. We want to be in the NCAA tournament. That didn't happen. We're going to make the most of it. If we're here, we might as well go and win it. And that's what Auburn did. And just think about how this changed your view of the season. It changed it in a dramatic, dramatic way. I think Auburn fans feel a lot better, fair or not, whether they should or not, about the future of this Auburn basketball program simply because you played in the NIT and you won 5 more games and won that championship. So this was a great decision from Stephen Pearl and all those involved to play in this tournament. Not only did you get to spend more time with this team, and some of those younger players had the opportunity to come back, got more time to practice, got more time to spend around the program. Stephen Pearl got to continue to coach, which is something that's very important for a first-year head coach. And then besides just the on-court basketball stuff, you talk about the revenue, even if it was a small amount that Auburn got to generate from having 3 more home games, that's still a big deal and that still matters. And so I think this was a really, really positive experience for Auburn. I thought as soon as Auburn made it to the Final Four of the NIT, this was going to be a net positive. However, the way the Tulsa game started to shake out there at the end, I was like, "Ooh, are you going to erase all the goodwill that you kind of built up over this tournament with another disastrous loss?" Because that's where we thought this was headed to finish off the season. And quite frankly, I thought it may have been a fitting way to finish off the season because this Tulsa game, was a microcosm of the entire Auburn basketball season. Stephen Pearl said after the game, I'm going to take credit for it because I said it first. I felt on social media before Stephen Pearl, but he may have been thinking it during the game like we all were. I think Justin Ferguson, that covers Auburn as well, said it. And it really was. It was a game that just was so much like so many games we've seen from Auburn this year. where this Auburn basketball team looks like they can compete with anyone in the country, can play at a really high level for a period of time, and then a switch flips and they look like they've never picked up a basketball in their life, can't get stops, can't score. And there were a variety of reasons for that in the Tulsa game. The foul trouble for Keyshawn Hall and Philip Jovich and Elijah Freeman, all of that played a factor into some of the runs that Tulsa had there in the second half. But nonetheless, we had seen this story before, and it felt like, okay, here we go. Auburn blows a 21-point lead. Tulsa has the momentum. Tulsa is going to win this game. Auburn takes the lead again within 2 minutes left. Tulsa gets a bigger lead. And really, Tulsa should finish this game off, and then Auburn gets a Tulsa gets a 5 second violation, forces a turnover, and then Kevin Overton, who has just been outstanding throughout this NIT tournament, makes a three to tie the game. Tulsa has one last possession; they can't get a good shot off, and then you force overtime. But you remember Auburn is playing this overtime period without Keyshawn Hall, who had fouled out in the latter half of the second half. Auburn is playing this overtime period without Philip Jovich out there. You're playing it with Tahad Pettiford and Caden Magwood out there at the same time, and then you get Blake Michalek in there some. So this wasn't an ideal situation for Auburn, but Auburn found a way to win, and this was not a game that Auburn would have won earlier in the year because we had seen this story before. Where Auburn, you think back to even the Texas A&M game, where Auburn blew leads that they had and weren't able to overcome it in the end and ended up losing games. So it was really felt like the same story, but to Auburn's credit, they found a way to overcome giving up the deficit. I mean, giving up the big lead and overcoming the deficit to win this game, and give them a ton of credit for that. Overall, the story of this team that they did finish 22-16 was inconsistency. And that was the theme when we talked about this team in October and in November. And it was the theme all year, unfortunately. The team at times, again, played really good basketball, but just could not do that consistently enough. And that'll be a big focal point, I'm sure, this offseason. But just to sum up the ending of the season before we start to begin to look at the future here for Auburn, a good finish to what was a disappointing and tough season. Look, winning the NIT does not change my view of this season in the sense that it was still a disappointing season. You had a nice ending to a disappointing season would be how I would put it. And I give Auburn credit for trying to make the most of a tough situation. I thought Kevin Overton put it so well after the game when he was asked on the TV broadcast. Well, essentially, you're NIT champions. How does that make you feel? And Kevin Overton, sat there for a second, thought about it, said, "We'll take it." And I thought that was the perfect response. Meaning, hey, this isn't where we wanted to be. This wasn't our goal for the season, but we were here. We made the most of it. We'll take it. And I thought that was perfect and really summed up kind of the thoughts of this team and the Auburn fan base this season. Okay, that's enough for the past. Let's talk about the future while also delving into the past a little bit to talk about Stephen Pearl and what to make of his first season. So I said at the beginning of the show, I said this season kind of felt like a fever dream. So what did I mean by that? I meant that it was just really weird. It was just really, really crazy. If you think back to the fall, I can remember where I was sitting when I got the news. I was at work. I get the news that Bruce Pearl's retiring. Wow. Before the first day of practice. Sad day. It was a shocking day, even though, there have been rumors that could be coming. It was not expected at the time that it happened, at least to me. So I think about that. I think about Stephen Pearl taking over and what Auburn had to do to keep the roster in place. And to this Stephen Pearl's credit, he was able to do that to keep players like Keyshawn Hall or Tahad Pettiford from leaving before the season started. Auburn does that. They survive. I remember watching the first exhibition game against Oklahoma State and then Auburn losing that game in overtime. I think about the game against Bethune-Cookman to open the season and having to go to overtime to win that one. And then all the games that took place this season, the near victory over Houston and Birmingham that Auburn just fell short in, the blowouts, the blowout losses that Auburn suffered this season, and then the painful endings in SEC play. It was just a really weird year, and these games were really weird, and it felt different. After being used to watching Bruce Pearl walk those sidelines for 11 seasons at Auburn, it felt weird seeing someone else do it, even if it was someone like Stephen Pearl. So that's why I said it felt like a fever dream of a season, just because it was just kind of crazy and it was unexpected, I guess, if you will. But what do we make of Stephen Pearl's first season as head coach of Auburn? I touched on this already and in the previous video, but I wanted to touch on it a little bit more because we have some updated data points now that Auburn did play in the NIT. So before I gave Stephen Pearl a D for the season, I thought that was fair at the time. Auburn did not make the NCAA tournament. I didn't feel and still don't feel that Stephen Pearl got the squeeze all the juice out of the lemon of this team. Like the talent and the roster had deficiencies, but Auburn had enough talent to be better than they were this season. And so therefore, I gave Stephen Pearl a failing grade, a D, and I count D as a failing grade. I don't know how your scale is, but I gave him a D. But because of the finish, because of the way Auburn played in the NIT, I did bump it up to a C now. Again, you can't be any higher than that for me as you missed the NCAA tournament. I just can't. So I have to still put it at a C. The expectations, as we've talked about, are what they are. The expectations are to compete for championships year in and year out, meaning SEC championships, NCAA tournament, making runs in March in the NCAA tournament. And so therefore, if those are your goals, those are your expectations, Auburn didn't meet those this year, and therefore I can't go any higher than a C. But as I've said before, this doesn't mean that a C is what Stephen Pearl is going to be throughout his career. If he is, he won't be here long. There is room for improvement. I think you saw improvement from Stephen Pearl at the end of this season and into the NIT. It's tough for me to tell you an exact game where the change happened or the exact week that it happened. However, I think you started to see a change in Stephen Pearl in the back half of the regular season into the SEC tournament. SEC tournament is really where I noticed it, and then into the NIT as well. It did sort of coincide with Stephen Pearl beginning to wear the suit jacket on the sidelines and getting rid of the quarter zip. So that was, again, that was towards the very end of the regular season. But his body language improved. He started sitting on the stool on the sidelines. He said that helped him a little bit with his stress. I thought he struck an overall more positive tenor in press conferences and as in his coaching overall than he did for the majority of the season. And I think it led to overall better play for the most part. Again, the Alabama game was really bad. You want to, there at the end of the season. The Tennessee game, again, I thought Auburn just got worn down in that one and just kind of lost its legs there. But overall, that was a change to me. There's no doubt Stephen Pearl evolved and learned a lot this season. He was asked what he learned at the NIT, and he, essentially said, we don't have time to go into all that. And that's how it should be. You should learn a ton in your first year. If you didn't, then you're probably just ignoring the signs that are there to learn. And so that is great to hear from Stephen Pearl. And I give him credit for evolving still during the season. Now, the key for him this offseason is continuing to figure out what he needs to change, what he needs to improve. At the end of the day, you have to be yourself. And we've said this since Stephen Pearl got the job. He cannot be Bruce Pearl. He's not Bruce Pearl. He has to be himself. He can't be his dad. But at the same time, you can figure out, hey, what do I need to do differently to connect with the players a little bit better? What do I need to do to get them to respond to me a little bit better? These are not just X's and O's things. These are just basic human aspects. And then from an X's and O's standpoint, of course, you're going to dive into, hey, why couldn't we close out games this year? Why did we blow so many leads? Why was the attention to detail lacking at times? Why was the effort seemingly lacking at times? Those are some other more basketball things as well that I'm sure Stephen Pearl and his staff will be diving into because this is a massive offseason. Again, this season failed to live up to the standard of Auburn basketball. So changes have to be made. Things have to be done to improve and get this program back to where it expects to be year in and year out and get it back to the standard. And I know that Stephen Pearl and the staff will do everything they can to make sure that happens. So with that being said, I want to dive into some trends of SEC head coaches over the last 5 years, along with some comparisons to some other similar styles of hires, just to give you an idea. This is just a fun thought process here to kind of go through, just to kind of give you something to chew on, I guess, to think about as we head into the off season. So let's start out with comparison to other internal hires across college basketball over the last 5 years. You ask, well, Carson, why do you do the last 5 years? The reason is NIL era, because I don't think comparisons within the last 20 years or something when college basketball was an entirely different game is extremely helpful. So that's why I'm going with other internal hires over the last 5-ish years. The tough part about this is there's nothing to, there's not an apples to apples comparison. So Kelvin Sampson, when he retires at Houston, his son will be the head coach at Houston. If that had happened before Stephen Pearl took over for Bruce Pearl, we would have a more apples to apples comparison. We don't have one. So we can only go with a few that are somewhat similar to Stephen Pearl. So who's a couple you can compare to? Hubert Davis is one. He just got fired at North Carolina. In his first season, he retained 9 players from the season before. Stephen Pearl retained one. Hubert Davis ended up going to the Final Four in year one. His tenure wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't up to North Carolina standards. He ended up losing his job after this past season. Whether you thought that was fair or not, it's debatable. Whether North Carolina fans would say it was not a successful tenure. Other college basketball fans would probably look at it. Other programs say, "Hey, look pretty good to me." But nonetheless, that's one that you can kind of compare it to. He was an assistant under Roy Williams at North Carolina, former player at North Carolina, and then took over as head coach, having no previous head coaching experience. John Shire at Duke is the big one. That's the one that everyone idolizes because that has been the most successful of them all. Replacing Coach K, was an assistant at Duke, played at Duke, and never been a head coach before. But he gets promoted, and he's had a ton of success. Of course, made the Final Four, had the gut-wrenching loss to UConn this year in the Elite Eight. But overall, he's had a lot of success. In his first season, he retained 5 players from the season before. A couple of other similar ones, but not exactly. Adrian Autry was the head coach after Jim Boeheim at Syracuse, was an internal hire. However, he did have previous head coaching experience. That did not work for him, though. He was fired this season. Ron Sanchez was the interim head coach after Tony Bennett retired in a similar fashion to the way Bruce did it. Ron Sanchez took over for Tony Bennett at Virginia, only had 1 season as interim head coach, and then they hired Ryan Odom. But Ron Sanchez also was a head coach previously before taking over at Virginia. You had Rodney Terry at Texas, who took over, ended up making the Elite Eight. That situation was weird because Chris Beard was fired mid-season. And Rodney Terry, yet again, someone else who also had previous head coaching experience. But those are some of the similarities that you can kind of look at for comparison. But again, none of them are apples to apples. They're all apples to oranges at that. So it is tough to really know, to get to pull what's going to happen with Stephen Pearl. But that's the reason I like to look at these things, because I love analytics for one, and I love stats, and I'm not a prophet, but I try to figure out, hey, what are the trends telling me? What percentage does Stephen Pearl have to succeed, chance to succeed at Auburn? And so looking at some of these comparisons kind of can give you a little bit of an idea. But again, every situation different. Every roster situation is different. Every team's NIL situation is different. And then, of course, how good the coach is varies from place to place. But I did want to dive into that a little bit. Other comparison, though, is comparison to first-year head coaches within the last 5 years. So these are not necessarily internal hires. In fact, none of these, I believe, are internal hires. They're all coaches that have been previous head coaches elsewhere that got hired into the SEC. So let's go over some of the ones who had tough starts, but so far have ended up fairly successful. Of course, the top one's Ty Golden. Ty Golden goes 16-17 his first year with Florida. He goes 24-12 in the second year, and then we know he eventually wins the national championship at Florida. I am not comparing Stephen Pearl to Ty Golden. I am not predicting a national championship. I just want to make that clear. But I just want to give you an idea of how some of these successful coaches in the SEC have started out their tenures. Mike White's another one, started 16-17 at Georgia. He went 20-13 in his second year. Georgia been solid. The level Georgia's played at, though, is not going to be good enough for Auburn fans' expectations. But for the Georgia program, he's been pretty solid there. Lamont Paris is an odd one because he's been very up and down at South Carolina. He went 11-21 in his first season, but then he went 26-8 in the second season. But he's been a seesaw, really, his whole tenure so far at South Carolina. Mark Byington's a big one. He went 17-15 his first year at Vanderbilt, and then this past year Vanderbilt was excellent and had some really big wins. Had made it to the NCAA tournament in his second season, so really good year for Mark Byington. So those are some of the ones that ended up successful. As far as coaches in their second year this past year, you got Mark Pope, who was, and Mark Byington along was in second year, as I already mentioned, but Mark Pope as well went 23-12 in his first year at Kentucky. John Calipari went 26-9 his first year at Arkansas. They both had their second seasons this year, but this is those and Bucky McMillan was in his first season this year, retained one player. So those three guys, Calipari, Pope, and McMillan, inherited a situation the most similar in the sense of way rosters go. So Mark Pope took over, retained zero players from John Calipari. John Calipari took over for Eric Musselman at Arkansas. He retained two players. Bucky McMillan retained one player from Buzz Williams at Texas A&M when he took over. So those three coaches were the most similar in what they took over roster-wise, but each entered into a different program. Kentucky and Arkansas, two of the fund basketball at two of the highest levels in the SEC. Bucky McMillan, A&M does not fund it as high of a level, but he did a great job in his first year at Texas A&M, making the most of his situation. As for the failed hires, these aren't as fun. Mac McMahon, he went 14-19 his first year at LSU, 17-16 second year, and then he's had a couple more years. He is out the door now. Just didn't work. Just did not work for him. It's been a mixed bag for a couple other coaches. Chris Jans with 21-13 first year at Mississippi State. Dennis Gates 25-10 first year. He's been up and down. Chris Beard 20-12 in his first year at Ole Miss, but then missed the tournament this past year. So with all that being said, if I didn't wear you down and bore you with that, what does this all mean? So to look when you look at taking all these stats and these trends, what do the trends tell us about what's going to happen with Stephen Pearl in year two? So just to give you an idea, I decided to put in this into AI. So the AI I used for this was Copilot, just to let you know. And I said, okay, let me know what the trends say. I put all those stats that I came up with there. I put them in there. I said, okay, what are the trends? What do you notice about the head coaches and what leads to success in year two? So the key trends were, one, if you have a near 500 record in SEC play in year or as overall record as a coach in the SEC, that typically leads to good things. Coaches who do okay in year one usually always improve in year two. So that was a good sign for Stephen Pearl. Number two, retention is extremely important. When the retention is less than two players or so in year two, it's usually not a good sign. When you're able to retain more guys after the first season, it typically leads to better results. So AI did a projection for Stephen Pearl. The expectation is a 3 to 5 more win in year two compared to year one. Does not believe regression is likely because of the player retention, with Stephen Pearl only having one player returning in his first year. Thinks player retention will help. The key trend that was noticed here for the retention was about 3 players. You can get 3 to 4 players or more returning. That usually led to more success in year two for coaches like Ty Golden in his for Mike White and Lamont Paris. They had high retention rates and it led to a big jump in year two. So essentially, retain, make the adjustments you need to make, and you'll likely have a jump in year two. So those are some positive, some encouraging signs. And then also, if you don't make that jump in year two, you're probably not making it. That was kind of also the trend that was pointed out here. You better make the jump in year two, or it's probably not going to happen. So year two will tell you all you need to know. If Auburn improves in year two, that's probably a good sign for the future of this program. Interesting. If Auburn does not, probably not a great sign for what is to come. So if we judge Stephen Pearl based off just looking at him as a new coach in the SEC, so take out internal hire, take out Bruce Pearl's son, just look at him as a new coach that came into Auburn to be the head coach. His outlook is bright, but his situation is unique. It is different than anything else. Auburn was coming off a Final Four in the year that he replaced Bruce Pearl. So there is context there that's important to note, and it remains to be seen. I stand by what I've said all. I believe Stephen Pearl will be successful as a head coach. Did this season go worse than I expected? Yeah, it did. But that didn't change my view or my opinion of what Stephen Pearl can accomplish and can do at Auburn. Okay, Now that we're through the coach, let's talk quickly about the roster outlook. Not going to spend a ton of time on this because, again, it's constantly moving, constantly changing. By the time you're watching this episode, there could be decisions already being made about some of these guys about entering the portal or staying. Just know I'm recording this on a Monday evening. Things change rapidly. So, as of right now, Keyshawn Hall, Keyshawn Murphy out of eligibility. They are gone. Everyone else can technically return. However, that is highly unlikely. I assume Caden Magwood is out the door. Things just didn't go well for him. He did get to play in the NIT. It just didn't work out. So you always assume in that case that that player is going to move on from the program if things don't work out for you in your freshman year. You can love that or hate that. It's just the way it is in this era of college basketball. One of the big ones is Tahad. What is he going to do? I have no clue. The consensus on social media, everyone thinks he's going to leave. I don't know. I mean, if you ask me a gut feeling, yeah, my prediction would probably say he's going to leave. He's going to command a high dollar amount in NIL. I don't know if Auburn is going to be willing to put that number up there to match what he and his camp want. But he has a chance to be an Auburn legend, quite frankly, if he comes back for a third year, continues to improve, continues to get better. So I'm sure there will be big selling points. I'm sure Auburn wants him back, but I don't have a great feeling one way or the other, really, on Tahad. Kevin Overton, this one's a big one. This is now, people may think I'm crazy for this, but as you said, you can only pick one player from this past year's team to return for next season. Kevin Overton would be that guy for me. He still needs to develop as a leader. He does need to get better in that aspect. He was one of the better leaders on this Auburn team, but I would not call him a great leader yet. He's an okay leader. I think he needs to take that next step, but I think he has the potential to do that if he comes back for another year. He is a really good shooter, turned into a really good shooter this year. He was streaky earlier in the season. Latter half of the season, he really shot it well. If he can continue that into next season, he can be a really good offensive threat for Auburn. Auburn needs him a little bit more defensively to improve. But this will be a big piece for Auburn to get back. I think it's a good chance he does return. Elijah Freeman said after, again, keyword being he said, after the NIT championship that he was, quote, locked in with Auburn. So if we take him at his word, that means he is going to return. The potential is still there. He's still really raw. He at times showed great potential. And he is a fantastic rebounder. He did that throughout SEC play in the NIT. He still has to refine his offensive skills, and he still has to get better at shooting the basketball. But the talent is there. There's no denying that. And I think another offseason could be really big for his development, and he could potentially turn into a really good player. So this will be a good news, I think, for Auburn as well if he returns. Sebastian Williams Adams Sway. He said after the game he needed to have conversation with Stephen Pearl about his future. I don't know. I think Auburn would like to have him back. Another player that's just really raw. Talent is there, but young and needs to be developed still. I think his offensive game especially has a long way to go. I still think he's a couple years away from being a good offensive player, but maybe he can prove me wrong if he does return to Auburn next season. Philip Jovic, I expect that he'll be back. He really had a great NIT tournament. Yes, the competition had something to do with that, but he's put in a lot of work. Remember, when he came over here from Europe, didn't speak much English, if any at all. He had to learn a new language. He had to learn a new system. It took time. And he also had to play a position that he really wasn't fit for in the five. He needs to play the four. Stephen Pearl said after the game that their plan is to get him back to the four position instead of the five next season, which will fit his skill set a whole lot better, and that will be big for Auburn. As for Simon Walker, Emeka Oporum, and Abdul Bashir, I really don't know on those three. Those are three guys that did not play much this season. Bashir had an injury, played a little bit early in the season, just really couldn't get it going. Oporum, we know, had the health condition, so he couldn't play anyways, even if he was healthy. Simon Walker was in and out of the rotation, just couldn't defend at a high enough level in the SEC. Those three, my guess would be at least Simon and Bashir. Probably not going to be back, would be my guess, but we will find out. So what needs to be done about the roster? That's the big question now as the transfer portal opens up. First, Stephen Pearl has to figure out who he wants and who fits what he wants to do. His roster construction probably going to differ a little bit from Bruce Pearl. We know Auburn just hired a new GM in Cloman from Louisville. So Stephen Pearl and Clement, I'm sure, have discussed how they want their roster to be built, and they'll figure that out. And it's probably going to look a little bit different because Stephen Pearl, again, has to create his own culture, his own program here. So that's the first thing. Figure out what you want to do. And I think at this point, they know that. And then it's figuring out how to get the right pieces on your roster, who to retain, who not to retain. I think a key point that Auburn has to be careful with here is do not let the NIT whitewash your memory or whitewash the issues that Auburn had this season with this roster and with this team. Yes, the NIT and winning that was great, but that doesn't mean this team, just the issues just went away. We saw that in the Tulsa game, in the championship game. There were still issues with this roster. There are improvements that need to be made, and you can't forget that through the staff. I don't think they will, but that's an important thing to note, to not fall in love with everyone on this team because of the NIT. There are ways to improve this roster. And then finally, I I don't know how many guys are going to return. I could see a couple things playing out here. I could see one where majority of the roster moves on, where you lose most of the guys to the portal. I could see a scenario where most return. It is tough to predict as we're sitting here at this moment. My guess is you'll only see a couple return. I could be wrong on that, but that's my guess. I think you'll see a few guys return. I mentioned who I kind of thought, Jovic and KO, and then Freeman said it, maybe Sway, but I don't think you'll see everyone, or I think you'll see quite a few leave. I don't expect a ton of returners, but I could certainly be wrong on that. Auburn has already made one addition. I apologize if I butcher the pronunciation, but Narcisse Ngoy from France, 7'1" center, European player coming in. So that was already one addition that Auburn made from Europe that will be coming in next season. But plenty more will be on the way. We'll have plenty more, I know, on the roster over the coming month as the portal gets going. And it's already gotten going today with announcements left and right. So I know there will be plenty of news to come, and we will break it all down here on Talking Tumors. But we've been going for a while. I appreciated you stuck with me and made it through this whole episode. And we will be back with another edition of Talking Tumors next week. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Talkin' Tumors. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe and follow @Talkin' Tumors on social media so you'll never miss an episode. War Eagle.